Welcome to First But Last, brought to you by the Wyoming Humanities. I am your host, Emmy DeGrappa. Wyoming is called the Equality State because we were the first to give women the right to vote. 150 years later, we wonder what Wyoming women think about the progress toward equality now. Let's find out, and thank you for listening. Today, we are talking to Rebekah Smith, also known as Rebekah Smith. She is the director of the Wyoming Women's Foundation, a priority fund of the Wyoming Community Foundation. So, Becca, I want to talk to you today about just your personal journey and how you came to Wyoming and where you were born.
Oh, man, I actually love telling this story about how I came to Wyoming because it's very serendipitous. First of all, I was born in Michigan, but that's pretty irrelevant to my life because I only lived there for about 2 years. I grew up mostly in New Hampshire, and I went to the University of New Hampshire for college. And then when I was in my junior year, I just kind of had this, I wanted to do something different. I wanted an adventure. And I knew my sister had done a study abroad. And I thought, that's what I'm going to do a study abroad. And I looked for a program that seemed really fitting for me, and I just didn't really find anything. And then I learned about the National Student Exchange. And I came into the program a little bit late. So a lot of the spots were already gone. And so there were only really a few different schools that I could exchange with. And Wyoming was one of them. And I was really interested in seeing the West, the Rocky Mountains. I'd heard a lot about it. And I really had heard a lot about, of course, Colorado and Montana. Didn't know a lot about Wyoming, but I was really intrigued by it. And so I came here for a semester and just really fell in love with Wyoming. And then I decided to stay for the summer. I got a job for the summer. And after that, it was a pretty simple process for me to transfer and graduate from the University of Wyoming. So that's how I got here.
Wow. I love that you fell in love with Wyoming right away. And it is interesting how people do hear of Colorado and Montana, but Wyoming is just like this really great secret.
It is.
So tell me more, because I was reading in your bio that you have degrees in physiology, fine art, and you also have a law degree from Vermont.
Right.
Oh my gosh, you're like the overachiever.
Well, I would say I'm kind of a Jill of all trades, and perhaps master of none. But I'm a generalist. I am interested in a lot of different things. And so it was always really hard for me to pick one. So I started out in zoology and physiology because I was always really interested in the natural world around me as a kid. And I learned about wildlife and ecosystems, and I worked for quite some time at the University of Wyoming for the Wyoming Natural Diversity Database, which is a database for rare plant and animal species in the state of Wyoming. And then while I was doing that, I also was continuing to go to school, and that's how I got my art degree. As I was working, I was taking classes part-time. And art had always been a passion of mine as a young person, and I liked to combine the two. I like to draw plants and animals. Mostly I did animals. And so I have quite a few drawings out there that I did kind of during that time. And so then I was looking for what was going to be next in my career, and I decided I wasn't going to continue on and go to grad school for zoology or art. And so I decided to go to law school. And my original plan was to kind of make that an extension of the work I'd been doing with the natural world. And I was interested in environmental law. So that's how I found myself at Vermont Law School, which specializes in that. But when I was actually in school, I found that there were other things that interested me more than the actual practice of environmental law. I still love nature. I still love the outdoors, but that wasn't where I decided that I wanted to work. So all of those different educational pursuits have really served me in different ways, and I've enjoyed them all. And I think for a long time, I just loved going to school and learning things. And I think I'm kind of past the needing to get another degree stage in life, but I still love learning things. And it is really nice to be someone who can kind of get into anything and, be interested in it. So sometimes there have been times when I wished I was a specialist in something, but there's, certainly a place for that. And some people have that personality. It's just not mine. And working in the nonprofit world has been a great fit for me as someone who, has a lot of different interests and at this point strengths. Since with a small staff, you're often called upon to do many different things. So that's kind of how it all ties together. And it's really become even more interesting with my work at the Women's Foundation, all of the background, all of the different background. And we can talk about that more later if you want.
I think it's super interesting that you went to law school and realized, I don't really want to practice law, but it still opened your mind to all the other things you could do. And maybe it wasn't law, but it was just opening your mind to find a new path.
Yeah, absolutely. I think someone gave me the advice, if you don't know what you want to do, try something and then, you'll learn from that. And so I didn't want to be stagnant, and I thought it was a good path. It was a really interesting education. And it was frankly really difficult to not pursue that as a career after coming out of, putting all of that time and effort into law school. It was kind of humbling to say, you know what, this is great, but this is not what I want to spend my life doing. So that was a really hard decision for me. And, I felt like I had to prove something. So I took the bar so that I, could feel in myself like it was more of a choice. Like, yes, I would like to use this education to do something else.
Well, what was your first job out of when you graduated from law school?
Well, this is essentially working at the Women's Foundation was my first real job. I had a couple of temporary jobs in between law school and the Women's Foundation. And yeah, I think I was really wanting to come back to Wyoming. And I saw this job at the Women's Foundation. At the time, it was program coordinator. And really what drew me to it was that I didn't actually know the Women's Foundation at that point, but I went to the website and I read what the mission was. And I thought, who can't get behind that? And the mission is to invest in economic self-sufficiency for women and opportunities for girls. And so, to me, that sounded fantastic. Who wouldn't want to do that? And so I wanted to be a part of that. So I kind of assumed it would be a temporary job, a way to get back to Wyoming from Vermont, where I had gone to school for a few years. And part of why I went to Vermont for school, in addition to the program that I was interested in, was because of my family still being there in New Hampshire, as an opportunity to be closer to them for a few years. So then when I got here to the Women's Foundation, it certainly became a large part of my life. And there was always a new challenge and something that appealed to my varied background and my, the different strengths and education areas that we talked about and just the network of people that I knew in Wyoming. So, one thing about that is that shortly after I joined the Women's Foundation, we started the Wyoming Women's Antelope Hunt. And so my background in wildlife really kind of was helpful for that, because I had worked with a lot of people that, studied big game or worked for the Wyoming Game and Fish Department, and we became partners with them. So it was just kind of an easy environment for me to speak in. And, I kind of understood the language that was being spoken there, and had some, contacts or felt like I understood the animals and the biology behind it. And then, we do a lot of advocacy too. And so that's where my law background really is helpful, because you do learn to think in a different way, or you kind of hone a different way of thinking and, forming arguments and kind of pulling out those points that you want to make to others about who you're advocating for and what the strengths are of those arguments. And so, that's been another area that really kind of drew me in. And something that I didn't know that I would really get into was just the development and fundraising aspect of the job. And it really is about working with people and developing relationships. And I think that's something that I just really like about it, because I like people. I like working with people. And, both art and law I found were actually kind of isolating, because you have to kind of work alone a lot of the time just to get your work done. And I love how I get to talk to people about the work we're doing. And it really is a great fit for someone who's interested in a lot of different things.
So when you talk to, let's say, a donor or a potential donor, what is it that stands out about the Wyoming Women's Foundation that inspires people?
I think people are inspired by different things. I mean, certainly your own experience and how you relate to an organization's mission is really important. So, I think it's also helpful to relate my experience to the donor and the work that we're doing. And so, for instance, I might share my own personal story about why economic self-sufficiency for women is important and opportunities for girls. And, that may resonate with them. I think a lot of people are particularly interested in the wage gap in Wyoming. And there's a lot of interest in helping, single moms, for instance, get on their feet, or, get additional training so that they can not just meet their needs, but, even experience success. And I think there's just a lot of empathy for women that are in that position, or even, women that are married that just aren't able to contribute as much as they'd like to their family. And so a lot of people, I think, have a personal experience or someone in their family that inspires them to want to help make change in the state for women.
Well, why did the Wyoming Women's Foundation start the Antelope Hunt? What's unique about it, and just what's the why about it?
We were approached, the Women's Foundation was approached to see if we would like to put on the Antelope Hunt, kind of for women, by women, and to benefit women. And we were approached by at the time, Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, Marilyn Kite. And she and her sister-in-law and a couple of friends had this idea to have a women's hunt. They were out hunting in the Red Desert for antelope, and they just thought, this is great. We're out here, the two of us together, but wouldn't it be really neat if there was more camaraderie and we were connecting with a lot more women and we were teaching women to hunt? And so they approached the director at the time in 2012, and she brought it to the board. And the board was able to really see the connection between self-sufficiency and learning to hunt your own food, and being able to put that nutritious meat in your freezer for your family. And so they were interested in it. And in particular, Shelley Simonton was one of our board members at the time. She was the chair. And of course, she was an avid hunter and a really strong advocate for women's economic self-sufficiency. And so she was one of the original planning committee members. And we had the privilege to just design this event to be what we wanted it to be, and so that it would embrace and fulfill our mission as the Women's Foundation. And so that was a really exciting thing to be a part of for me. Of course, there's a lot of logistics involved with that, but just to be able to design an event so that we focused on the mentoring aspect of hunting, which is a natural platform for that relationship between a mentor and a mentee. And then also to make sure that we were giving the hunters the tools to have a safe hunt and take care of the land and practice conservation practices. So we also wanted to make sure that it was the type of event where it really raised all women up, and that they felt supported in doing something that might be a new challenge for them. The other benefit to it that I don't even think was anticipated right at the beginning was that, so what we do is we select experienced hunters and we pair them with an inexperienced hunter. So, and then they go out into the field with a guide. So the hunters are both women. The guide is sometimes a woman, sometimes a man. So what we didn't anticipate was that mentor hunter, who was a woman, had maybe never been asked to fill that role before, because women are rarely looked to as mentors in the hunting field because, first of all, they're often not going out with other women. And I think by default, a lot of times it's the guy, if you're going out, like, that people look to for guidance and help. And so it was really exciting for some of those women who had been lifelong hunters to all of a sudden realize, oh, I can fill this role too. And I have a lot to offer. And so it's been beneficial for developing mentors and mentees. And there's been kind of this progression beyond the hunt of maintaining those relationships with a group of past hunters called the Sisters of the Sage. And they go on to organize future hunts or hunts beyond the Wyoming Women's Antelope Hunt to continue helping the newer hunters learn to hunt, because of course it's not something that you learn in one weekend. It can be a really great experience. It can be life-changing. And still, if you're a brand new hunter, you need a bit more support beyond that. So, and then of course, we talk about our mission at the event. And then the event raises funds for our operations and our mission. So, it's really beneficial to the Women's Foundation in several different ways.
I think it's so interesting, especially maybe you take a woman out who's never held a gun in her hand, or she hasn't had that role in her family. Maybe her husband's a hunter, but she's not.
You're right. It's amazing how many hunters that we've had who grew up in hunting families, and they were either not welcome or weren't invited or to go out hunting with the men of the family. And they want their chance and they want to learn what it's like to be in that role. And that can be a really exciting and powerful experience for them.
So when you have a guide, or let's say you have a woman, she has never hunted, she isn't confident using a gun, do you provide gun lessons, or how does she get to that place where she's confident to go out and actually hunt?
Yeah, that's a great question. We do provide instruction on how to shoot. And if a hunter hasn't taken hunter education prior to the event, which we encourage, they can take it at the event. So they come a day early. The Game and Fish, the Wyoming Game and Fish helps us with that. They offer the class and they do it in coordination with the event. And so in that class, they learn, of course, about hunting and also about firearms. And then we have a full day before the event as well that's dedicated to sighting in your rifle and practicing. We also have loaner rifles for women that don't own a gun and or aren't able to travel with one. And so a lot of our first timers will use those. And so the nice thing about that is that they're all the same. We're all very familiar. We provide the ammo. And we have just some amazing volunteers and a great partnership with the Wyoming Game and Fish Department, who really do a lot of that work with our hunters for the sight-in and for that shooting practice. And then we also have a skills course that they do after they're at the range. And that's where they take their rifle and they learn to actually move with it in the field. And so they're focusing on safety, like how do you make sure that you're not ever pointing your gun in the direction of your hunting partner or your guide. You need to always be aware of that, even when you're going under a fence. So they practice going under a fence with their rifle unloaded, of course. And then they'll practice loading and unloading. We have some ammo that is just like rubber bullets. And so they can practice that without, being nervous about having live ammo. And so, they'll go over obstacles. They'll kind of talk about how to stock up on the antelope. And we've had great feedback about that's really helpful for people, especially if they're not familiar with the landscape. We do have hunters that come from out of state and they may not have, moved through sagebrush before, for instance. And so, those are some of the things that we offer. And then we just, every guide and hunter pair, we just encourage them to communicate as to what the comfort level is of the new hunter. And sometimes they want to go first and sometimes they want to go second so that they can watch their partner, how they do it and what the process is and gain a little bit more confidence by seeing someone else do it first.
Well, where were you in this whole antelope hunt when you started it? Were you a hunter? Did you know how to hunt? Did you own a gun, or was this all new to you as well?
That's a great question. I actually did not own a gun. I had done hunter safety about probably 10 years before we started the antelope hunt. And I'd always wanted to hunt, but I did not grow up in a hunting family. And so I kind of dreamed about it as a kid. I would like to, harvest my own food kind of thing. And I did go out with friends a couple of times over the years, never harvested anything or was along for a harvest. And so, I'd kind of walked around on the landscape looking for animals, but had never seen any. And so I was really invested in this idea of helping women learn to hunt, that didn't have that experience. So yeah, it was really exciting to see that happen, especially the first year for those new hunters. I was like, I know what you feel like. And I, at that time I was like, I want to feel that too. So I did get to go hunting after that first year and started my hunting journey too. So now I've harvested an antelope, a deer, and an elk.
Good for you. Congratulations. I love hearing that. What does your family think about that? I mean, I'm sure they can't even imagine because it's not a family that went out and hunted, but what kind of reactions do you have?
Very supportive. Yeah, I have two siblings. Neither of them I don't think have been interested in hunting, but and my mom was, a real pacifist. So she just we didn't have like any firearms in the house or anything. And but she's very supportive. She lives in Wyoming now as well. And, she really appreciates, that I am out there getting the food for the family. And, she's done everything she can to help, like, watching our son while my husband and I went out and got the elk. And we have done all of our own butchering as well. So we wanted the whole field to fork experience. And my mom, has eaten it with us too. So she's enjoyed my harvest as well. So I've had absolutely no negative feedback from it.
That is excellent. And I love that she's embraced what you're doing, and she actually lives here.
Mm-hmm.
And so what do you find most intriguing about living in Wyoming?
Well, I don't know if this is intriguing exactly, but one of the things I like about it the most is the community. I mean, and maybe that is intriguing, but I think that's what drew me in to Wyoming, in addition to the landscape. I mean, I love the landscape here, but I really found a great community in Laramie. And one of the reasons I think for that is just the way that geographically the state is set up. The towns they're so compact, like everybody in Laramie is together in Laramie, and there's not, people travel across the state, but things are a bit more fluid. Like for instance, in New Hampshire, where I grew up, there's not as much of the town center kind of thing. It's just sort of everyone is just kind of spread out across the landscape. And here there are, of course, with those big spaces in between population centers, I feel like it brings us together a bit more in those communities. And now that I travel a lot around the state, I also, know that there's a ton of mixing between those communities, but I think it just makes you invest in your own community and feel like you belong to something because it's sort of well defined. The limits of it are a little bit more defined than, say, where I grew up in New Hampshire. And I really like that you can kind of get everything you need here in town. When I lived in New Hampshire, it's very rural where I lived, but in a different kind of way. Rather than having large spaces in between everything, there are certainly people in between, but you have to drive 20 minutes in one direction to get your car fixed, 30 minutes in the other direction to get groceries, 10 minutes the other way to get your haircut. And so there's a lot of, it's not very efficient. You're just driving all over the place all the time. And I love it. In Laramie, it's just simple. You don't even need a car if you don't, can't afford one or whatever. You can get by in this town without a car if you had to. And that just is kind of more simple, I think.
How has COVID changed how you're in terms of you're a statewide organization, and how has COVID changed how you're working with people or women especially?
Yeah. Well, so one of the things that we do is we make grants to organizations around the state. So we partner with them to fund programs for women. So we are, other than the Antelope Hunt, we're a little bit secondary to the work that's happening on the ground. We don't work directly with women. And so we work directly with those grantee partners to make sure that they're able to still offer those programs. And so during COVID, I think our role was as to provide information for those organizations to make sure that they had access to the resources that they needed and training that they needed. We wanted to be a resource for that, and then also to kind of keep a bird's eye view of self-sufficiency for women in Wyoming. And so what is it, keeping an eye on what does it look like in terms of the job landscape for women, and what are the impacts of COVID on women as far as childcare and their ability to work. So we are in our position as a statewide funder, we're also trying to provide that information to make sure that those that are making decisions around the state that might impact women and families understand what it is that those impacts have been from COVID. And so to that end, we've been working on a series of kind of brief reports that talk about the impact specifically to women from COVID and just kind of what's going on right now in Wyoming in general. And so as far as how we work with people, of course, like everyone, much more Zoom. But I don't think that that's a bad thing in such a large state, because I think it has brought to light some efficiencies that we can all use in our non-COVID times as well. And so I think that it's brought our communities closer. For instance, the legislature being able to watch what's going on in the legislature rather than having to go to Cheyenne. And being in Laramie, it's not too hard to get over to Cheyenne, but if you have to go there for just an hour meeting, it still takes much less time out of your day to just log in and listen on a Zoom. So I think, like a lot of people, Zoom has dominated our lives a bit, but I don't think it's a bad thing.
No, I have a love-hate relationship with Zoom. So I appreciate it, but it's, Zoom fatigue is real. And I have realized that. But
yeah,
in keeping your hand on the pulse of what's going on with women and jobs in Wyoming, how has the energy industry affected them, like coal and oil, things like that? Has that been a big deal?
I mean, I think that it has been a big deal for the state, certainly. I don't think that's the biggest reason that women have been leaving the workforce, because not as many women are employed in those industries. So, yes, specifically, I wouldn't say that is something that's, a huge factor for women. I think that the need to stay home with kids that maybe couldn't go to school or weren't in school in person full time, or daycares being closed, has been a bigger issue for women. But we are just about to get to wrap up that data from 2020. And so I'll have more information on that later.
That'd be really interesting to see, just because we are, a small population, to get a really good view of how COVID affected women in terms of not being able to go to work or having to work at home, having to work and then homeschool your kids, and just that whole picture of how it affected people.
Yeah, absolutely. We did kind of an early COVID impacts report, and that was a survey conducted by the Wyoming Survey Analysis Center. And that's available on our website about the impacts of COVID on women.
Yeah, that's going to be interesting.
Yeah, a lot of that is kind of what types of pressures that they were feeling. That particular one doesn't have numbers on, how many people had to leave their jobs, but there is a little bit of information on that as far as like, did you feel like your child had a place to go or that your child was safe? And so it is a great first snapshot. And so, like I said, we're in the next month here, we should be getting the second one out as well.
So outside of your work with Wyoming Women's Foundation, which obviously you have a lot of passion for, what is your personal passion? What do you do outside of work?
Well, I have a 2.5-year-old son, and so he takes a lot of my time and energy, and husband and my mom lives in Laramie. And so, family is really important to me, of course. And I like to go outside with them. And so the outdoors has always been a passion of mine. I like mountain biking, cross-country skiing, hiking, and just, being outside. And I just think that Wyoming is such a great place to do that, especially during COVID. It's been really apparent how fortunate we are in Wyoming that I never felt like I was completely cooped up because I could always go to the Medicine Bow National Forest and see no one for for days, if I wanted to go up there and camp off-road somewhere. So, that's just something I love about Wyoming, is that I never feel like I really have to go away on vacation because I feel like I'm in the place where I want to vacation.
Well, I think the rest of the United States is figured that out as well.
I think you're right.
We're having record visitation to Wyoming right now.
Yeah.
From every direction. And it's like, no, I mean, we are funny. We're funny.
I know.
We want to have new industry. We want to really develop the cultural economy. We want to have great opportunities for our people in Wyoming, but we don't really like people.
That's why we live here, right?
I know. We're like, no, we don't want more people. We like wide open spaces. We like those, when you go outside and you can see the sky. And
well, there seems to be a human tendency everywhere to kind of like your own. I mean, there's always pride in being able to say you were born in a place, born and raised. That's worth something. As someone who moved around when I was young and settled in a place where I wasn't born, I recognize that there's sometimes a little too much emphasis on that. So I think home is where the heart is, and where you can contribute to your community.
Oh, wow. That is really beautiful, Becca. Thank you so much. And thank you for talking to me today.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to First But Last, brought to you by the Wyoming Humanities. Please join us again next week as we continue our conversations with women from around the state. You can also find us at thinkwy.org, where we continue the conversation on our blog about the history, journey, and the challenges of Wyoming's intrepid women living in the equality state. And if you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to the show and leave us a review on iTunes. Thank you for listening.